Good day, everyone. How's your day? Comment down below. Anyways, today we are going to talk about Article 2.25, the outside branch circuits and feeders. So, above is the picture where the overhead branch circuit or feeders conductors are located. Napod na ginatawag na underground branch circuit or feeder conductors. Makita na to siya dire, of course, underground. So, to start, ang mga outdoor conductors running sa mga buildings kay dili na lang na sila necessarily nga service conductors. Pwede pud na sila mga feeders or branch circuit conductors originating in another building. Sila ang mag-provide sa power for area lighting, outdoor equipment, or a separate structure. So to define what are feeders, so unsa ba ng feeders? They are the power lines in which ang electricity kay matransmit sa power system. A feeder line is a type of transmission line. So a branch circuit is defined as that part of an electric circuit extending beyond the last circuit breaker or fuse. Kanang mga branch circuit kay mag-start na sila sa breaker box. Extended dayon sa electrical devices connected to the service. Sila ang last part sa circuit supplying electrical devices. So naabay differences ang feeders o ang branch circuit? Yes, of course, na sila differences. Napod sila difference. The main difference is that a feeder runs between an overcurrent protection devices OCPD at the supply and downstream OCPD, while a branch circuit runs between an OCPD and an outlet diretso. In other words, a feeder supplies power to a branch circuit. So guys, I just wanted to inform you na nating mga subtopics diri na magian, although mas madiscuss pa siya sa mga next na articles. So, 2.25.1.3 is the calculation of loads 600 volts nominal or less. First is the branch circuits. So, kanina part is na-discuss na siya sa Article 2.20 but again, mauni siya ang table for calculation of loads of a branch circuit. So, unit load in volt ampere per square meter. So, for example, we have armories and auditoriums. So, we have 11 volt ampere per square meters. For hospitals, we have 22 volt amperes per square meters and so on. Next is feeders. So, same with branch circuit last time. This part also kay na-discuss na siya last sa Article 2.20 but in general, the calculated load of a feeder or service shall not be less than the sum of the loads on the branch circuit supplied. So kanina table natay portion of lighting loads to which demand factor applies in volt ampere, for example sa hospitals. First 50,000 or less at remainder over 50,000 at. So notice guys na natay demand factor dire. Natay demand factor sa table, but know that the demand factor of this table shall not apply to the calculated load of feeders or services supplying areas in hospitals, hotels, and motels where the entire lighting is likely to be used at one time. Next is 2.25.1.4 conductor coverage. Open individual or aerial overhead conductors shall be insulated or covered within 3,000 mm of any building or structure other than supporting poles or towers. So, conductors and cables or raceways, except anang type MI cable, shall be of rubber covered type or thermoplastic type. So, ang thermoplastic type, ang commonly known nato na thermoplastic type are the PVCs, the polyvinyl chloride, and PE, the polyethylene. So, natay na, so gamitan daw nato og rubber covered type or thermoplastic type ang mga conductors and cables or raceways except aning MI. So, unsa din MI cables? So, mineral insulated cables or simply MI cables are cables in which conductors or wires are enclosed by a metal jacket and insulated with a hard-packed magnesium oxide. So for 2.25.1.6, the conductor size and support. So natay overhead spans. So open individual conductors shall not be smaller than the following. First, for 600 volts nominal or less, ang gamiton nato is 5.5 mm squared copper or 8 mm squared aluminum for spans up to 15 meter in length, and 8 mm squared copper or 14 mm aluminum for a longer span unless supported by a messenger wire. So by the way guys, ang messenger wire runs parallel to the overhead cables and act as support for the cable, especially in harsh condition. So next is the for over 600 volts nominal, 14 mm squared copper or 22 mm squared aluminum were open individual conductors, and 8 mm squared copper or 14 mm squared aluminum were in cable. So next is the festoon lighting. So ang atong gamiton aning conductors, overhead conductors for festoon lighting, kay dapat dili siya smaller than 3.5 mm squared, and pag ang mga spans mag-exceed sa 12 meter, kinanglanan nato gamitan siya og messenger wire to protect it from kuan pod, para makaiwas pod sa disgrasya. Then kanang mga messenger wire nato dapat napod na sila naka-support na ay sila support na strain insulators. So kani ang strain insulators guys. Next is the lighting equipment installed outdoors. So next, common neutral. So ang ampacity sa neutral conductor shall not be less than the maximum net compound load current between the neutral and all ungrounded conductors connected to any one phase of the circuit. So 277 volts to ground. So ang mga circuits nga mag-exceed og 120 volts nominal pero wala niabot og 277 volts nominal, kay permitted na sila to supply luminaires lighting fixtures for illumination of outdoor areas of industrial establishments, office buildings, schools, mga stores, and other commercial or public buildings. So for 600 volts between conductors, so maupod ni sila ang mga circuits na nag-exceed og 277 volts pero wala ga-exceed og 600 volts. Permitted sila to supply the auxiliary equipment of electric discharge lamps. Next is 2.25.1.10 wiring on buildings. The installation of outside wiring on surfaces of buildings shall be permitted for circuits of not over 600 volts nominal. So, circuits over 600 volts nominal again shall be installed as provided in 3.0.2.7. So, this part will be discussed on Article 3 and mas ma-discuss pa siya dito. Next is 2.25.1.11 circuit exits and entrances. So the requirements where the outside branch and feeder circuits leave or enter a building are under Article 2.30.4.13, which is the individual conductors entering buildings or other structures, and 2.30.4.14, the raceways to drain. So for the first part, where individual open conductors enter a building, natay ginatawag na roof bashing or through the wall. Dito na i-enter ang mga conductors. Either way guys, anyway, kaning nga part is mas ma-discuss pa ni siya sa akong partner because it's under ni siya sa iyang report. Although Next is raceways to drain. So, kanina part pod kay exposed to the weather. So, raceways enclosing service entrance conductors shall always be rain tight and arranged to drain. Next is 2.25.1.12, the open conductor supports. So, as you can see, kani nga mga pictures, kay mo ni sila ang materials na mag-support sa open conductors. Kani is porcelain knobs. Porcelain knobs. Kani is brackets. And this one is strain insulators. So, ang porcelain knobs or knobs, kay dira nato i-anchor ang mga wires. Next is open conductor spacings. So under these we have 600 volts nominal or less. Conductors of 600 volts nominal or less shall comply with the spacing provided in table 2.30.4.12c. So here is the table. So at maximum volts, for example, we have 600. Maximum distance between support in meter, we have 2.7. For its minimum clearance between conductors and from surface, we have 150 millimeter and 50 millimeter from surface, and so on. Next, over 600 volts nominal. So for conductors of over 600 volts nominal shall comply with the spacing provided in section 4.90.2.4. So this table will be discussed in article 4, but to give you an overview, we have nominal voltage rating, we have 2.4 to 4.16 kilovolts for impulse withstand. In kilovolts, in indoors, we have 60, and outdoors, we have 95, and so on. Please, kuan lang kay murag i-discuss jud ni siya sa article 4.90.2.4. Thank you. For letter C, we have separation from other circuits. Open conductors shall be separated from open conductors of other circuits or system by not less than 100 millimeter. So, dapat jud siya i-separate. Ang open conductors, i-separate na to siya from other open conductors. At least man lang 100 millimeter. Letter D, the conductors on poles. Kani po mga conductor on poles, kay dapat po na to na i-separate not less than 300 millimeter where not placed on racks or brackets. Kani po mga conductor supported on poles, kay dapat mag-provide na sila og horizontal climbing space not less than 750 millimeter on power conductors below communication conductors. So guys, ang communication cable or communication conductors is an electric cable used to send information signals So number 2 kay power conductors alone or above communication conductors. So we have 300 volts or less, we have 600 millimeter, 750 millimeter for over 300 volts. Communication conductors below power conductors, same as power conductors. Number 4, lastly, communication conductors alone. Wala siya requirement. So next is attachment to buildings. So we have point of attachment and means of attachment. The point of attachment to a building shall be in accordance with 2.30.2.5. So kanina part is under siya sa article 2.30. Next is 2.25.1.17, masts as supports. So masts and supports used for support of final spans of feeders or branch circuits. So kanina picture kani is mo niyang masts. And all raceways fittings shall be identified for use with mast. So guys, the mast, a pipe-like housing that connects service wires to your meter, is one piece of equipment that is considered na imuha as customer. The mast will either be on your roof or on the side of your home. So here, kanina picture is na siya violation because only branch circuit or feeder conductors can be attached to a power mast. Next is clearance from ground. So overhead spans of open conductors and open multi-conductor cables of not over 600 volts nominal shall have a clearance of not less than the following. So first is 3,000 millimeter. Muna siya ang mga above finished grade sidewalks or from any platform or projections na from which they might be reached where the voltage does not exceed 150 volts to ground and accessible to pedestrian only. Next is 3,600 millimeter. Over residential property and driveways and those commercial areas not subject to truck traffic where the voltage does not exceed 300 volts to ground. Number 3 is 4,500 millimeter. Muna siya ang mga areas listed in the 3,600 millimeter classification where the voltage exceeds 300 volts to ground. Lastly, under sa clearance from ground is 5,500 millimeter. Over public streets, alleys, roads, parking areas subject to truck traffic, driveways on other than residential property, and other land traversed by vehicles such as cultivated grazing forest and orchard. So part of this article 2.25 also is the clearances from buildings for conductors of not over 600 volts nominal. So again, from above the roofs, overhead spans of open conductors and open multi-conductor cables shall have a vertical clearance of not less than 2,400 mm above the roof surface. The vertical clearance above the roof level shall be maintained for a distance not less than 900 mm in all directions from the edge of the roof. So this picture guys kay gikan ni siya sa National Electrical Code, and from here edge sa atong roof padulong dire sa mast kay dapat at least maximum of 4,000 maximum of 4 feet over roof. And from here we can see that 18-inch minimum and maximum of 6 feet of conductors over roof. Next is from non-building or non-bridge structure. From signs, radio and television antennas, tanks, and other non-building or non-bridge structure clearance, vertical, diagonal, and horizontal shall not be less than 900 mm. For horizontal clearances shall not be less than 900 mm also. So, next is the final spans. Kani guys, final spans of feeders or branch circuits shall comply with the following. First is the clearance from window. So, kadugdug mo na tudlo ni Sir sa ato na dapat ang final spans to the building they supply or from which they are fed shall be permitted to be attached to the building, but they shall be kept not less than 900 mm from windows that are designed to be open. So, of course, importante pad kaayo no na medyo layo-layo po siya sa atong window so that makaiwas ta sa mga disgrasya na mahitabo katong so bawal jud na nimo himuon siya og halayhayan, no? Bawal kayo. So exception for this is conductors run above the top level of a window shall be permitted to be less than the 900 millimeter requirement. Next is vertical clearance. The vertical clearance of final spans above or within 900 millimeter measured horizontally of platforms, projections, or surface from which they might be reached shall be maintained in accordance with 2.25.1.18. The building openings. The overhead branch circuit and feeder conductors shall not be installed beneath openings through which materials may be moved, such as openings in farm and commercial buildings. So, bawal na siya dito. And shall not be installed where they obstruct entrance to these building openings. So, bawal pud ka magbutang dito sa mga openings sa building, no? Dili palayo pud nato, no? So, next is zone for fire ladders. So, ang mga overhead lines nato is dapat naka-arrange especially sa mga buildings na nag-exceed 3 stories or at least 15 meter in height so that a clear space or zone at least 1,800 millimeter wide will be left either adjacent to the buildings or beginning not over 2,400 millimeter from them to facilitate the raising of ladders when there's a case of firefighting, for example. Next is 2.25.1.22. The raiseways on exterior surface or buildings or other structures. So for this part, the raiseways on exterior buildings shall always be arranged to drain and shall be rain tight in wet location, especially sa gawas kung mabasa og ulan. So dapat jud rain tight siya para dili siya masudlan og tubig og dili mag-cause og mga hazardous things og dili mag-cause og mga problema sa ato ang raceways. So dapat rain tight jud siya, guys. Next is 2.25.1.24 outdoor lamp holders. So by the way, guys, exception atong last part, exception ani ang 2.25.1.22 kay kana bitang mga flexible metal conduit nato dili na sila kinahanglan og dili na sila required to be rain tight. So balik ta aning 2.25.1.24, the outdoor lamp holders. These it shall be attached only to conductors of the stranded type. So mao ni ang picture sa lamp holders for outdoor. Moreover, the outdoor lamp holders holders are attached as pendants. The connection to the circuit wire shall be staggered or move siya since nakabitay raman ni siya. Next is location of outdoor lamps. So mga outdoor lamps na ta. Hapit na ta, guys, kalma lang. Wait. Location of outdoor. So kaning mga outdoor lamps nato, always nato na sila ibutang below sa mga conductors na energized transformers or electric utilization equipment. So dapat jud sa ubos siya. Unless either of the following apply. So pwede na siya ibutang sa taas if clearances or other safeguards are provided for relamping operations, equipment is controlled by a disconnecting means that can be locked in the open position. So next is vegetation as support. Vegetation as support. Vegetation such as trees shall not be used for support of overhead conductor span. So, guys, nakabantay mo ana if sa ako experience sa kabantay ko sa mga provinces na mga uban ibutang dikit nila sa mga trees, but actually bawal jud na, for example mag-ulan og kusog pud ang hangin, so na tendency na ma-fall ang trees dili sa imo. So na tendency na ma-fall ang trees, tapos mawala ang kuryente sa inyo because of the reason na gihimo ninyo support ang tree, which is dili jud pwede. Next is more than one building or other structure. So for number of supplies, isa ra ka feeder supply ang isa ra ka supply. More than one building or other structure is on the same property and under single management, isa ra ang mag-supply ana na feeder, unless under special conditions. So additional feeders or branch circuits shall be permitted to supply the following: fire pumps, emergency system, legally required standby systems, optional standby systems, parallel power production systems, and system designed for connection to multiple sources of supply for the purpose of enhanced reliability. So under this, pwede ta duha ang ato ang feeder supply. Pero kung wala na ni, isa ra ang ato ang feeder supply kung ang buildings ay nasulod sa isa ka property under single management. Special occupancies. For special occupancies, by special permission, additional feeders or branch circuit shall be permitted for either of the following: multiple occupancy buildings, where there is no space available for supply equipment accessible to all occupants. Next is a single building or other structure sufficiently large to make two or more supplies necessary. Letter C is capacity requirements. So, if for instances atong capacity requirements kay nag-exist of 2,000 amperes at a supply voltage of 600 volts or less, then that's the time na kinahanglan nata og additional feeders or branch circuits. Next is different characteristics. So there is an additional feeders needed or branch circuits needed for different voltages, frequencies, or phases, or for different uses such as control of outside lighting from multiple locations. Lastly, documented switching procedures. So if the documented safe switching procedures are established and maintained for this connection, then pwede ta magbutang og additional feeders or branch circuits sa mga supply installation bahalag under pa na sila sa single management. Next is disconnecting means. So diri na disconnecting means. For disconnecting means shall be provided for disconnecting all ungrounded conductors that supply or pass through the building or structure. So location. So, ang location sa ato ang disconnecting means kay always dapat jud na siya sa inside or pwede na pod inside or outside of the building or structure. Kinanglan atong mga disconnecting means kay kinanglan readily accessible siya. Dapat ang location kay nearest the point of the entrance of the conductors para pod sa pag naay mga emergencies, guys. Pag naay mga emergencies, dali ra nato siya ma-disconnect. Next is maximum number of disconnects. Maximum number of. So in general, the disconnecting means for each supply permitted by this article shall consist of not more than 6 switches, so 6 switches or 6 circuit breakers mounted in a single enclosure. So, there shall be no more than 6 disconnects per supply group in any one location. Next is single pole units. So 2 or 3 single pole switches or breakers capable of individual operations shall be permitted on multi-wire circuits, one pole for each underground conductor as one multiple disconnect, provided na naa siya ay equipped na main handle to disconnect all underground conductors with no more than 6 operations of the hand. Next is grouping of disconnects. So kato akong gi-mention na 6 disconnects, 2 to 6 disconnects, kay i-group na sila. Then dapat each disconnect kay naa sila mark to indicate the load served. So dapat naa sila mark na naka-indicated to kung pila ang load na ilang gi-carry or serve. So next is access to occupants. So, sa mga multiple occupancy building, dapat ang mga occupants ana nila kay na sila access sa mga supply disconnecting means. For example, in case of emergencies, pwede sila ang muadto didto dali-dali para mo shut sa in case of emergency and for the safety also. But di ba namatay na hibalaan ng mga buildings na nakabutang authorized management personnel only, kana sila ang mga person na tigbantay sa mga disconnecting areas or disconnecting facilities, and okay ra wala na access ang mga occupants. So mo na exception ana ang part. So next is suitable for service equipment. So, ang ginagamit nato sa mga garage and outbuildings on residential property na mga disconnecting means kay a snap switch or a set of 3-way or 4-way snap switches, mao na sila ang permitted as the disconnecting means. Next is identification. So, again, for identification, once gali ang building or a structure kay na ay combination of feeders, meaning na one or more feeders iya ang supply sa iya, then there's a need to have a permanent plaque or directory to be installed at each feeder and branch circuit disconnect location denoting all the services, feeders or branch circuit supplying that building. So need siya og plaque or directory. Next is disconnect construction. Construction. Disconnecting means shall meet the requirements of 2.25.2.9. So, exemption for disconnect construction for garage and outbuildings on residential properties, snap switches or a set of 3-way or 4-way snap switches shall be permitted as the disconnecting means. So here are the requirements. A is manually or power operable. So manually or power operable. The disconnecting means shall consist of either manually operable switch or kanina circuit breaker. Example ani circuit breaker. Dili ni siya basurahan guys ha, circuit breaker. And dapat equip siya with a handle or other suitable operating means. Pwede pod a power operable switch or circuit breaker provided na the switch or circuit breaker can be opened by hand in the event or power failure. So in case of emergency, pwede ra ang tao ang mo off ana. Next is simultaneous opening of poles. So ang mga buildings or structure disconnecting means shall simultaneously disconnect all underground supply conductors that it controls from the building or structure wiring system. Next is disconnecting of grounded conductor and indicating. For indicating, the building or structure disconnecting means shall plainly indicate whether it is in the open or closed position. So normally, ang mga circuit breaker nato kay pag naa siya sa up, it's on position. Pag naa siya sa down, it's off position. So mas ayos po siya nakabutang ang on position is nasa ataas so that in case of emergency, igura na lang nimo siya birahon. Igura na nimo siya i-pull down ana. Next is 2.25.2.10 rating of disconnect. So for rating of disconnect, dapat ang mga feeder or branch circuit disconnecting means kay ilang mga rating kay dili dapat less than sa load sa i-supply. Kay of course dapat makawithstand ato ang disconnecting means sa load sa i-supply sa feeders. So it is determined in accordance with parts 2.2. And for feeders, in no case shall the rating be lower than specified in the following. First, 1 circuit installation. For installations to supply only limited loads of a single branch circuit, the branch circuit disconnecting means shall have a rating of not less than 15 amperes. For 2 circuit installation, for installation consisting of not more than two wire branch circuits, the feeder or branch circuit disconnecting means shall have a rating of not less than 30 amperes. For 1 family dwelling, not less than 100 amperes, 3 wire, and all others. For all others installation, the feeder of branch circuit disconnecting means shall have a rating of not less than 60 amperes. Next is access to overcurrent protective device. So since dili man accessible ato ang feeder overcurrent device, dapat ang ato ang branch circuit overcurrent device such as fuses, circuit breakers, kay installed on the load side and shall be mounted on readily accessible location. It shall be of a lower ampere rating than feeder overcurrent device. So always na ko ginasay guys na ang ato ang overcurrent devices kay dapat jud na siya readily accessible for in case of emergency kuno ay for example imong for example na isunog tapos imong mama gadali-dali, so dapat ma-access sa imong mama inyong circuit breaker og dali-dali para ma-off niya. So next is over 600 volts. Under this is 2.25.3.1 the sizing of conductors. So human naman na takal ang mga size sa conductors. Next is 2.25.3.4 the type. So type, wait lang, the type. So each building or structure disconnect shall simultaneously disconnect all underground supply conductors it controls and shall have a fault closing rating not less than the maximum available short circuit current available and its supply terminals. So hapit na ta guys, kalma lang. Next is clearances over roadways, walkways, rail, water, and open land. Under this, we have the 22 kilovolts nominal to ground or less. So the clearances over roadways, walkways, rail, water, and open land for conductors and live parts up to 22 kilovolts nominal to ground or less shall be not less than the values shown in this table. So here in the table, we can see that, for example, the clearance of open land subject to vehicle cultivation or grazing is at least man lang 5.6 meter. O for rails, 8.1 meters. For walkways, 4.1 meters. For water areas not suitable for boating, at least man lang 5.2 meters ang clearance niya. Next is the over 22 kilovolts nominal to ground. So, clearance for the categories shown in table above shall be increased by 10 millimeter per kilovolts above 22,000 volts. So, i-increase lang nato og 10 millimeter if over 22 kilovolts nominal to ground siya. Next is clearance over buildings and other structures. For 22 kilovolts nominal to ground or less, the clearance over buildings and other structure for conductors and live parts up to 22 kilovolts nominal to ground or less shall not be less than the values shown below. So mo ni siyang values, guys. So for balconies, catwalks, and similar areas accessible to people, at least man siyang cleared siya for in horizontal to 2.3 meter and vertical 4.1 meter for safety purposes. So and so on, guys. Lastly, over 22 kilovolts nominal to ground, same with last part, shall be increased by 10 millimeter per kilovolts above 22,000 volts. So increase lang nato siya og 10 millimeter. So that's it, guys. Thank you for listening, electrical practitioners, and I hope you learned something in my discussions today. And if you do have some questions, please comment down below because I will try to answer it. And guys, I just wanted to leave something in you. Just like feeders that supplies power to a branch circuits, OCPDs, be the feeder that supplies power to anyone in these times full of uncertainties. Char, thank you. Bye-bye. And please subscribe to my YouTube channel. Halim Dimasindil. Thank you.